Good morning, all. Good to be back joining this little gathering. And welcome 2026. I have a list of the questions submitted, and the first one is from Deepthi. And I don't think Deepthi is present yet, but it asks, when experiencing emotional suffering, is abiding in the self, the I am, a form of spiritual bypassing? I've noticed that fully staying with the physical sensation of emotional pain, allowing it to move through the body, helped me. For example, when a similar situation arose again, the intensity of the emotion felt in the body, especially around the heart, was noticeably reduced.
It continues for a couple more paragraphs.
I see. While I'm able to abide in the sense of I when it comes to thoughts, it becomes more challenging when I'm in the middle of strong emotional experiences. If I try to bypass the pain in those moments, it feels like I'm merely ignoring it rather than moving through it. Sitting with the sensation, however, seems to bring clarity and relief. Some spiritual traditions recommend observing and allowing bodily sensations to naturally dissolve into awareness, whereas Ramana Maharshi's teachings emphasize directly abiding in the self. My confusion is, does directly abiding in the self bypass the emotional experience? And if not, how does the intensity of the emotional pain actually heal? I want to ensure that I'm not pretending the pain isn't there. Could you please share your insights on this?
Right. Okay. I've heard this term spiritual bypassing. It's not entirely clear to me what is meant by that. I've got some vague idea, but certainly Bhagavan's path is not bypassing in a wrong sense of the word. That is, let's first talk about the things that you say are helpful. You say, I noticed that fully staying with the physical sensation of emotional pain, allowing it to move through the body, has helped me. Doing so may have some sort of therapeutic effect. So it may ease the pain, but it's not a lasting solution, because the root of all pain, the root of all suffering, is the sufferer, the one who experiences the pain. That is ego. When we rise as ego in waking and dream, we experience pleasure and pain. Sometimes the pain or suffering can be very intense, but we can experience that only so long as we remain as ego. When we fall asleep, we as ego dissolve back into our source, albeit only temporarily. But when we have dissolved back to our source in sleep, there is no pain, no suffering. We don't suffer at all. The suffering comes back only when we rise again as ego. So without ego, who is the experiencer of suffering, there can be no suffering. So Bhagavan's path of self-investigation is a means to eradicate ego. And by eradicating ego, it eradicates all suffering. Because ego is a false awareness of ourself. That is, as ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body, I am this person. And because as this person, we've undergone certain experiences, those experiences may have caused trauma or whatever, and that brings about emotional suffering. But all this is only the trauma we experience, it remains only so long as we're identified with this particular person. This person has a limited lifespan. We may live in this world. I mean, some people have a very short life. Some people have a relatively long life. But even if we live, say, 100 years, this life is going to come to an end sooner or later. So when 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 the life of this person that we seem to be comes to an end, all our memory of all the experiences, both the happy and the unhappy experiences, even the traumatic experiences, all gets erased. And then when we rise again as ego, we project a new identity, a new person, and we go through so many experiences. So we recall in this present life, we recall whatever traumatic experiences we may have experienced in this life, but we don't recall any of the traumatic experiences we underwent in previous lives. So these are all these any type of experience, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, whether it's um, uh, uh, pleasurable or whether it's suffering, it all arises only for ego, and the recollection of it lasts only so long as we're identified with the particular body that we now experience as I. So the root of all suffering is this I that rises as I am this body. Because ego is a false awareness of ourself, that is, because as ego, we're always aware of ourself as I am this body, which is not what we actually are. Ego can be eradicated only by awareness of ourself as we actually are. So the aim of self-investigation is to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. That's the ultimate aim. But even in the process of self-investigation, to the extent to which we as ego attend to ourself, we thereby subside. That is, Bhagavan has revealed the nature of ego. He's expressed it very clearly in verse 25 of Ulladu. Ego, he describes ego as a formless demon. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. Since in its formless state, it's got no separate existence. It's only when we identify with a form that we seem to have a separate existence. So ego comes into being as a separate entity only only when it grasps and identifies a form as I. So what he says in that verse is, talking about ego, grasping form, it comes into being. That is, as soon as we rise as ego, we project a body and identify it as I. So grasping form, it comes into being. Grasping form, it stands. Stands here means it endures. So long as we cannot rise or endure as ego without constantly grasping form. In this context, grasping form means identifying the form of a body as I. And then he goes on to say, the basic grasping, first thing we grasp is the form of the body that we take to be ourselves. And Bhagavan has clarified elsewhere in Ulladu, but when he talks about body, he's not just talking about the physical form of the body. In verse 5 of Ulladu, he says, Urul Pancha Kosa Uru, the body is a form of 5 sheaves. The 5 sheaves are the physical form of the body, the life that animates it, and the mind, intellect, and will that operate within it. These five are called the Panchakosha, the five sheaves. And we experience them collectively as ourself. So in that verse 5, he says, the body is a form of five sheaves. Therefore, all five are included in the term body. So what he talks about in the first two sentences of verse 25, when he says, grasping form it comes into existence, grasping form it stands, he's referring to the form of a body, that is a form of five sheaves. In other words, the person we take ourselves to be. But having grasped the form of a body as ourself, we become aware of so many other forms. And then we are constantly attending to those other forms, because once we identify ourselves as a body, we become dependent on other things. That is, as a body, we depend on air to breathe, we depend on water to drink, we depend on food to nourish and sustain this body, and we depend upon so many other things. And because we as human beings, once we identify human body as the human species is a social species. So we're dependent on others, we're dependent on relationships and so many things. So we become dependent on things when we limit ourselves as a form. Since we're dependent, we are always trying to acquire the things that we depend upon. We're constantly breathing to get to take clean air into our lungs. We every day we need to eat and so on. We depend on so many things. So we don't just stop with grasping the form of a body as I. Having grasped the form of a body as I, we are then constantly grasping other forms. Grasping other forms means we're constantly attending to things other than ourselves. So in the third sentence, he says, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. That is, attending to things other than ourselves is the very food on which we as ego depend for survival. When we are too tired to continue grasping form, we subside into sleep. But sleep is only a temporary dissolution of ego. It's not permanent. So we want, in order to bring an end to all suffering, we need to bring an end to ego permanently. So he then goes on in that verse to say, leaving form it grasp form. That is, because ego is dependent on grasping form, it cannot stand for a moment without grasping form. So if it leaves one form, it grasps another form. This applies both to moment, how our attention is going from one form to another, one object to another. It's also referring to the fact that when the form of this body dies, we subside, but then we rise again, projecting another body. So ego is dependent on form. Though it in itself it is formless, it cannot come into being, stand, or flourish without constantly feeding on form. So, but then in the next sentence he says, Tedinal otum piticum. That literally means if seeking, it takes flight. If seeking in this context means if we as ego seek to know our own reality, seek to know what we actually are, seek to know who am I. In other words, if we turn our attention within to see what we actually are, otum piticum, that literally means it takes to running. In other words, it takes flight, it runs away. So we seem to be ego only so long as we're attending to things other than ourselves. When we turn our attention back towards ourselves, we as ego subside, and if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will eventually dissolve back into the source from which we rose. And that is the end of ego and the end of all suffering. And the source from which we rose is our own being. Our own being, means what we actually are, is infinite happiness. That is, what we actually are is Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means pure being. Chit means pure awareness. Ananda means pure happiness. That is what we actually are. The reason why we're not aware of ourselves as the infinite happiness that we actually are is because we've risen as ego and limited ourselves by identifying ourselves as a body. So Bhagavan's path of self-investigation is dealing with the very root cause of suffering, namely our rising as ego. It puts an end to the rising of ego. By putting an end to the rising of ego, it puts an end to the sufferer, the one who is suffering, that is ego. And when we put an end to suffering, what remains is infinite happiness that is our own real nature. So this certainly isn't spiritual bypassing. We are undermining the very foundations of the emotional suffering. So if we persevere in the practice of self-attentiveness and attending to ourselves, we as egos subside more and more. And the more we subside, the more our suffering subsides with it. So you say, while I'm able to abide in the sense of I when it comes to thoughts, it becomes more challenging when I'm in the middle of strong emotional experiences. Well, all experiences are thoughts, but the emotional experiences are thoughts which are charged with emotional energy. So that emotional energy is what makes it more difficult for us to turn away from them back towards ourselves, the one to whom they appear. But though it's more difficult to do so, if we're able to do so, it's that is, the more we are able to hold on to self-attentiveness, the more we are weakening the Vishaya vasanas, the inclination to attend to other things. So the emotional experiences will lose their power to the extent to which we practice self-attentiveness. So this is the very opposite of bypassing. This is going to the very root cause of suffering, which is our rising as ego. So when we rise as ego, we undergo so many experiences. Some of our experiences are pleasant, but nobody has an entirely pleasant life. That is the nature of embodiment. It's a mixture of pleasure and pain. And we undergo all sorts of experiences in life, and some experiences can be extremely traumatic. But all these are possible only because we have risen as ego. So if we want to put an end to all suffering, all trauma, all pain, on a permanent basis, not just that is, if you say, if you say you've noticed staying fully with the physical sensation of emotional pain has helped you, that may be, but that's only a temporary alleviation of the pain. That is not a permanent solution, whereas self-investigation is a permanent solution. Ultimately, when we reach the goal of self-investigation, which is the complete dissolution of ego, all pain, all suffering, all trauma comes to an end forever. But even in the process, to the extent to which we are self-attentive, to that extent, we not only are we as ego subsiding, but all the other thoughts and emotions, they lose their power to the extent to which we subside. And we subside to the extent to which we are self-attentive. So no, this certainly isn't spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing may be finding some easy way of ignoring it, but this isn't merely ignoring the pain, isn't merely ignoring the suffering. It's turning our attention back to the I that is suffering. Who am I who am experiencing this suffering? So it's going to the very root of the problem, and this is Bhagavan has said that this is that knowing ourselves is extremely easy. That is true, but to most of us, when we try to follow this path, it seems to be extremely difficult. The reason it seems to be extremely difficult is not because it's actually difficult, it's because of the strength of our Vishaya vasanas, the strength of our inclinations, our liking to attend to other things. So it's our lack of willingness to hold on to self-attentiveness that makes it seem to be difficult. So it requires great love and perseverance to follow this path successfully. So this isn't bypassing, this is confronting the very root cause of all suffering, which is our rising as ego and attaching us, and thereby attaching ourselves to forms, primarily to the form of the person we take ourselves to be. Yeah, and now I see Dipti, I think you weren't there earlier. Dipti, did you hear all of my answer? And is it a satisfactory answer to your question?
Namaste, Michael. Thank you
Namaste.
so much. Yeah, I truly get what you're saying, and I
Yes,
have to implement that in my practice.
yes, right, right.
Thank you so much.
One other thing I wanted to clarify, you talk about abiding in the self. Um, it's important that when we use these terms, we understand what we mean. Firstly, it's not to say abiding in the self is not entirely accurate, because that makes it sound like the self is something other than ourself in which we've got to abide. We're abiding as ourself, as we actually are. But how do we abide as we actually are? We are always what we actually are, but we seem to be something other than what we actually are because we've risen as ego. And so the means to be as we actually are is to hold on to self-attentiveness. Self-attentiveness is the key to self-abidance. Self-abidance means being as we are. But in order to be as we are, we need to cease rising as ego. And in order to cease rising as ego, we need to be self-attentive.
So at the beginning, I was unable to be um, abiding as the self because the thoughts are like populating
Yes,
way too much. So what I'm doing is while that is happening, I'm trying to bring back my attention to myself,
yes,
and as soon as I'm getting more thoughts, I'm getting back to it. All I'm doing is like I'm staying awake to even identify that I'm getting the thoughts. So as soon as
yes,
I get the thoughts, I'm trying to abide as a self.
yes.
It can be 1 or 2 seconds before another thought hits, but do you think like the more I do this, the less I get the thoughts?
Yes, Bhagavan has said this very, very clearly in the sixth paragraph of Nana. He says, what does it matter however many thoughts arise? As and when each thought arises, it's necessary to investigate to whom. If we very vigilantly, if we whenever any thought arises, if we investigate to whom, it will be clear to me. If we investigate who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace and the thought that had risen will subside. What he means by that is investigating to whom. It doesn't mean asking. He doesn't say ask. He says the verb he uses in Tamil is vichari, which means investigate. So if we investigate to whom, that means turning our attention back to ourselves, the one to whom whatever thought had arisen. So the investigating to whom is the turning of our attention away from other things back towards ourselves. And then he says, if one investigates who am I, what he implies by that is, having turned our attention back to ourselves, we need to try to hold on to that self-attentiveness. And if we hold on to that self-attentiveness, the mind will thereby subside, and the thought that has risen will also subside. And he then says, Ipadi paraka paraka, manatiku tampirapidatil tangi nikam shakti adikadi kindradu. What that means is, by practicing and practicing in this manner, for the mind, the power, the strength to remain in its birthplace, in other words, to remain subsided in its being, is increases. So by this practice, that is the way to improve our ability to practice self-investigation is to practice self-investigation, because more we practice, the more we increase the strength of our self-attentiveness. To understand this, it's important to understand how vasanas work. Vasanas, there are basically two types of vasanas at the most basic level. There's Vishaya vasanas, which are vasana means inclination. Vishaya means objects or phenomena. Anything other than ourselves is a Vishaya. So Vishaya vasanas are the inclination to attend to things other than ourselves. And why do we attend to things other than ourselves? Because we think we'll gain happiness from those things. So the inclination to seek happiness in other things is called Vishaya vasanas. The opposite of Vishaya vasanas is Sat vasana. Sat means being. It refers to our own being. So our inclination, our liking to attend to our being is what is called Sat vasana. So if we understand Bhagavan's teaching correctly, Bhagavan says happiness doesn't lie in any of the objects of the world. Happiness lies only within us. Happiness is what we actually are. So if we really are convinced of that, we will have a strong love to attend to ourselves. So that liking or love to attend to ourselves is what is called Sat vasana. The nature of vasanas have no strength of their own. Whatever strength vasanas seem to have is strength that we have, that they derive from us. So how we strengthen vasanas is by allowing ourselves to be swayed by them. So for example, suppose we have some bad habit, like suppose we have the habit of smoking. The more we give in to the inclination to smoke, the stronger the inclination becomes. If we want to break that inclination, we have to have a strong liking. No, smoking is bad for my health. It's going to make me sick and premature death and all that. We cultivate the liking to avoid smoking, because we want to remain healthy. So there's then a battle going on in our will between the inclination to smoke and the inclination to avoid smoking in order to be healthy. The more we manage to avoid smoking, the stronger the inclination to avoid smoking becomes, and the weaker the inclination to smoke becomes. This is just an example, but this is so with all vasanas. This is how, over time, our vasanas change. Certain vasanas lose their strength, other vasanas gain strength. So whatever we are interested in, whatever draws our attention, those things get stronger and stronger. So in the case of self-investigation, if we're constantly attending to things other than ourselves, we are thereby strengthening the Vishaya vasanas. But if we cultivate this practice of self-attentiveness, when we attend to ourselves, we are not allowing ourselves to be swayed by the Vishaya vasanas, any Vishaya vasanas. So the Vishaya vasanas lose their strength. But we are being swayed by the Sat vasana, so the Sat vasana gains its strength. So the liking to be as we actually are, to attend to ourselves and thereby subside back into our being, increases the more we practice. So that's why Bhagavan says practice is absolutely essential. This is key. That is, however difficult it may seem to be, we should persevere in trying to be self-attentive. And even if we're only able to hold on to that self-attentiveness for a moment or two, every moment of self-attentiveness is so precious, because it's strengthening the Sat vasana and weakening the Vishaya vasanas. Bhagavan said no effort made in this path will ever go in vain, because every moment of self-attentiveness, we're one step closer to our goal. And Bhagavan also said, even a moment or two of self-attentiveness is of greater value than many, many hours spent in any other type of meditation. because this is other types of meditation are on something other than ourself. This is the direct path. We're attending to ourself, which is what we are seeking to know is what we actually are. Because only when we know what we actually are will ego thereby be annihilated, and will we experience the infinite happiness that we always actually are. Is that a clear answer?
Thank you so much, Michael. If this is a very clear answer, if I can ask, I have a follow-up question on
Yes,
this.
certainly, certainly.
So, I try to be this way, but the thing is, like, if nothing is happening in life, and if I am by myself, this becomes easy, because I have to only deal with my thoughts, right?
Oh,
But
yeah,
when I go to the office every day, when I'm dealing with the kids, or like when I deal with the other people who are a little bit negative, right?
yeah,
Always complaining, I feel like I'm completely going away from myself, and through that conversation, let's say we have a conversation and the
yeah,
other person is talking negative, I feel like I'm completely taken away from myself,
yeah.
and even after the conversation, at least for a couple of hours, I'm still um, going in the loop of like what has happened, and I in that
I,
moment, I even though I try hard, I am unable to come back to myself. Is
I
there
know.
any?
I know. This is. We all experience this, but ultimately, it's just like it's. Bhagavan said, thoughts are not the problem. The problem is our liking to attend to the thoughts. Likewise, all these external distractions, it, they are not the problem. The problem lies within us, our liking to attend to these distractions. So by the only way is to persevere in the practice. The more we persevere in the practice, the less we will be affected by these external things. Yes, of course, the world is full of all types of people. There are also, I mean, people, everyone is dealing with their own problems. And if someone talks negatively about other people, it's just a reflection of the problems that are going on within them. A happy person will not talk negatively about other people. So if I'm always talking negatively about everyone else, it means I'm unhappy in myself. So because many people are very profoundly unhappy in themselves, there's a lot of negativity about. But why we are affected by this? Because we allow ourselves to be drawn into these things. Sometimes situations arise, someone is talking negatively, we may not be in a position just to cut them off. We may have to listen to them, but we shouldn't give weight to their words. We should just feel sorry for them, that this is such an unhappy person, that this negativity they're expressing is a reflection of their own unhappiness. So we should feel sorry for them rather than giving weight to the words that they talk about. I mean, the words that they say about other people, we shouldn't give weight to that. We should just recognize that this is a deeply unhappy person, and we should wish the best for them. In that way, we can deal with these. There are ways of dealing with these things to stop ourselves being sucked into that negativity.
Thank you so much, Michael. This is really helpful.
Yes.
Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.
Now, Michael, would you like to address? There's a couple hands up. Would
Let,
you
let's
like?
yes, let's address whatever. If anyone's raised their hand, let's address those questions.
Okay, David, you were first.
Yes, okay. So I can focus on myself a fair amount of the time, but I have a number of medical conditions. For example, I have periodic limb disorder in sleep at 151 movements per hour, which is extreme. I have severe restless leg syndrome, and some other conditions. I don't get involved psychologically, But for example, last night, I only slept approximately 2 hours. I have to get some blood transfusions because that's part of the circumstances for restless leg syndrome. So I want to know what I do, except just to notice that I'm physically, bothered by something and then go back to focusing on myself. So that's my question, is just some guidance on that. And thank you for considering the question.
I mean, when we identify a body as I, we are vulnerable to so many things. And one of the things is to various types of disease, various types of illness. When illness or discomfort comes to the body, we can take this as a reminder of the inevitable suffering of embodied existence. If we rise as an ego and thereby identify ourselves as a body, we are courting suffering in so many ways. Even if we have a healthy body, there's no guarantee that what body that is healthy today is going to be healthy tomorrow. Even the most healthy people sometimes suddenly have a heart attack, or suddenly they get diagnosed with cancer, or they may be perfectly healthy but they're hit by a car or something, and then we as an embodied being, we are extremely vulnerable. So having the sort of conditions you have is a very good reminder of the unsatisfactory nature of embodied existence. So it should motivate us more and more to follow this path, because this is the only way of freeing ourselves from embodiment. Because if we don't free ourselves from embodiment now, this body is sooner or later going to die. But the cycle is going to continue. So long as ego survives, the cycle of birth and death is inevitable. So the only permanent solution is to eradicate ego. And the only means to eradicate ego ultimately is self-investigation. Other means, I mean, and this isn't putting down other spiritual practices. There are so many good spiritual practices, but they're all means for purifying the mind. Which is necessary. We need purity of mind, but none of them are as effective at purifying the mind as self-investigation. And none of the other practices, though they can purify the mind, that is, they can weaken the Vishaya vasanas, they cannot eradicate ego. This path of self-investigation is the most effective means to purify the mind, and it is the only means to eradicate the mind, to eradicate ego, which is the root of the mind. So whatever physical ailments come to us, this is all according to destiny. And whatever destiny is given to us is what is most conducive to our spiritual progress now. So take all these things as a Bhagavan is making life difficult for you in order to motivate you to hold more and more firmly to self-attentiveness. Because so long as we hold onto this body, suffering is inevitable. If we want to be free of suffering, the only thing is to hold on to our being. And because to the extent to which we hold on to our being, we are thereby relinquishing our hold on the body. The body is not holding on to us. We are holding on to the body. So if we want to be free of this dehabhimana, this attachment to an identification with the body, ultimately the only means is self-investigation, holding on to self-attentiveness. Is that a helpful answer?
It is a helpful answer. Thank you.
Right.
Now, Jacques, you had your hand up. Was your question answered, or did you still have a question?
Yeah, well, it was more or less answered. I think, Michael, you said it. You said if we are able to. You said at one point it's just. I think it's a very, very valid question. The whole thing about spiritual bypassing, people should look it up actually, because the person who came up with that had their own controversies. I won't get into that, but um, um, yeah, it's just that sometimes things are overwhelming, and so we try and get
Yeah,
into self.
we all get overwhelmed
Yeah,
sometimes, but we're
right.
not we none of us are overwhelmed all the time.
No, no, for
So
sure.
when we're not overwhelmed, let's hold on to self-attentiveness.
Yeah, no, no, but
And let's be realistic about it. There are times we're going to fail. I mean,
yeah.
but the road to success is paved with failure. If
Mm,
we don't fail, that means we're not trying. So we shouldn't be disheartened by failure. Failure should encourage us to persevere, because success, nobody, whether in spiritual path or in worldly endeavors, nobody has succeeded at anything without failing many times along the way. It's the nature of things. So we
mm.
shouldn't be disheartened by failure. We all fail. It's the very nature of the mind to fail. This is an undertaking unlike any other undertaking, because the natural flow of the mind is to go outwards, to constantly grasp things other than ourselves. So when we try to turn our attention back within, we are swimming against the current, so to speak. So this is the supreme endeavor. And of course we're going to fail. We all fail. But just because we fail doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep on trying, because we will succeed only if we persevere in trying. And as Bhagavan said, every moment that we manage to hold on to self-attentiveness is a big step forward in our, a big step along the way. So we should treasure every moment of self-attentiveness. And if those moments of self-attentiveness are few and far between, we should treasure them all the more.
Good enough, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jacques. And now Shriram.
Thank you, awesome, very much. Michael, thank you very much. It's very moving and profound and very detailed analysis of very good question by Deepti. So I have a question. It looks like there is vasanas, the Vishayavasana and Sadvasana. And then, especially with the Vishayavasanas, we have to combat them with persistent practice of going back to self-attention. So now some people, it's natural for them to be self-attentive, and others is very difficult, as we see. So these vasanas have been told that
it is not natural for any ego. If for some people it seems to be relatively easy, it is only because of the amount of practice they've done. So practice is whether it seems to be extremely difficult or slightly less extremely difficult, the only way to success is to persevere in the practice.
Now you mentioned that chitta shuddhi, or cleaning, the purification of the mind, is kind of essential if you want to succeed in self-attention. But at the same time, you said that self-attention itself is the remedy for purification of mind.
It's the most effective. That's what Bhagavan implies very clearly in the verse 8 of Upadesha. That is, in verse 3 of Upadesha, he says, Kartano kakam nishkarmiya karma, karte tirti artundi para, gati varikam bikumundi para. What that means is nishkarmiya karma. That's action done without, not motivated by desire, but done for God. When he says done for God, it implies done for the love of God. Will purifying the mind. It will often it's translated as it will show the way to liberation. But the actual meaning of kambikam, it will cause us to see the way to liberation. In other words, it'll give us the clarity to see what is the way to liberation. So only when the mind is purified will it be clear to us what is the way to liberation. That's in verse 3. then he begins to talk about the different types of nishkamya karma we can do. So in verse 4, he says, this is certain. Puja, japa, and dhyana are actions of body, speech, and mind. And in this order, each one is superior to the previous one. When he says superior, he means it's more efficacious in purifying the mind. Then he goes step by step through each of these. He first talks about what is puja, and he gives a very broad definition of puja in verse 5. Then in verse 6, he talks about japa, and he says better than singing hymns of praise, japa is good. Better than japa done loudly, japa done softly within the mouth is good. Better than japa done softly within the mouth, japa done mentally is good. Better than, and that japa done mentally, that is a form of meditation. And then in verse 7, he says, rather than interrupted meditation, meditation that is uninterrupted, like the flow of ghee or the flowing of a stream, is good. Why he says that? When he says it's good, it's good means it's better than, because it's more efficacious in purifying the mind. Why is that? Because if we are meditating, supposing we're meditating on a name or form of God, if our mind keeps on getting diverted away by other thoughts, that shows that we don't have sufficient love for meditating on the name or form of God. The more we're able to hold on to that focus on a name or form of God, that indicates the intensity of our love for that. So the uninterrupted meditation is better than interrupted meditation. So up to verse 7, he's talking about karmas, because they're all actions. Puja is action of body, japa is action of speech, and meditation is action of mind. So these are all karmas. But no karma is the way to liberation. But by these karmas, we gain the purity. But then in verse 8 is the important turning point. In verse 8, he says, rather than anya bhava, ananya bhava is best among all. Anya bhava means, anya means what is other. So anya bhava in this context means meditating on God as if he is something other than ourselves. Rather than that, ananya bhava, meditating on him as nothing other than himself. And he adds there, avanaham ahum ananya bhavam. That means the otherless meditation in which he is I. So when we recognize that God is not something other than ourselves, God is what we actually are, God is what is shining in our heart as I, with that understanding, meditating on nothing other than I, is anatimnam uttamam. That is best among all. When he says it's best among all in the context, he means this is the most purifying of all the practices. And then what happens when we practice meditation on ourselves, when we do not meditate on anything other than ourselves, by that self-attentiveness, we as ego subside. And where do we subside? We subside into our being. So in the next verse, he says, by bhava balatina, that means by the strength of that bhava. What bhava? He's talking, it's a clear reference to what he said in the previous verse about the ananya bhava, the otherless meditation. In other words, the self-attentiveness. So by the strength of self-attentiveness, bhavanatita satbhava tu iratale. That being in satbhava means the state of being, which is bhavanatita. Bhavanatita means it is beyond bhavana. Bhavana here implies meditation in the form of mental activity. If you're meditating on God as something other than yourself, that is a mental activity. Whereas meditating on ourself is not a mental activity, it's a cessation of mental activity. Because to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego thereby subside. So by that the strength of self-attentiveness, that is, by persevering in this practice of self-attentiveness, we subside back into our being. And that, he says, is parabhakti tattva. That is the real nature of supreme devotion. That's the state of complete surrender. Because when we hold on to self-attentiveness to such an extent that we subside back into our being, we are thereby completely surrendering ourselves to God. So that is the supreme devotion. And then in the next verse, he says, verse 10, being having subsided in the place from which we rose, that is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. In other words, the goal of self-investigation is to subside back into the source from which we rose and to be as we actually are. That is the culmination of all spiritual paths. So
That's
very
phenomenal.
clearly, when he says in verse 8, anetyanam uttamam, he's very clearly teaching us, pointing out that of all the spiritual practices, self-attentiveness is the most effective at purifying the mind. There's a double benefit to self-attentiveness. Not only is it the most effective means of purifying the mind, it's also the only means by which we can eradicate ego, which is the root of all impurities. So it's the only way by which we can remove all impurities from the mind. Remove
Beautiful.
the mind itself, because the mind itself is an impurity.
Beautiful. Michael, that's just gorgeous. Very, very beautiful analysis.
Yeah.
Now, the free will, this is where the free will question I have. Usually, Bhagavan has said that prarabdha is dominant and the vasanas.
He's never said that.
Well, I mean, the things will happen according to...
You ask your question and I'll clarify.
Yeah, okay. So the ordainer has decided how to do and so on. So my question is, the vasanas, especially the Vishaya vasanas, how do they come? They come from prarabdha, is that preordained? And the other thing is we have to fight those with our persistent effort. Is that what free will given to us is? This battle?
To a certain extent. That is, we need to understand this clearly. That is, prarabdha determines what we are to experience. Our freedom of will and action determines what we want to experience and what we try to experience. There is no conflict between these, because it may be my prarabdha to live in poverty all my life. But just because I'm destined to live in poverty doesn't stop me wanting to be rich. It doesn't stop me trying to be rich. So the prarabdha does not limit our freedom of will and action. And our freedom of will and action cannot change what we are destined to experience. I may so much want to be rich. I may spend all my life trying to be rich. If it's my destiny to be poor, I'm never going to succeed. So they're two different domains. Destiny determines what we are to experience. Freedom of will and action determine what we want to experience and what we try to experience. So about freedom of will, in one sense, freedom of will, that is the English term free will is a very vague term, because what most people mean by free will is the freedom to do what you want. That is not freedom of will, that is freedom of action. So Bhagavan distinguished freedom of will and freedom of action, though he often spoke of them together because they go hand in hand. If we had no freedom of will, having freedom of action would be meaningless, because so our will is free in two senses. In one sense, we are free because no one can make us want what we don't want. No one can stop us wanting what we do want. So in that sense, we are free. However, the limitation on our will is an internal limitation, because our will consists of what? It consists of the vasanas. primarily. The vasanas are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So the vasanas are what constitute the will. So why we like certain things and dislike certain other things is because of our vasanas. Those vasanas are vasanas that we've cultivated over so many countless lives. As Bhagavan says at the beginning of the 10th paragraph of Nana, though Vishaya vasanas, which come from time immemorial, Tondru Totu Kara Varukindra, Tondru Totu means from the beginningless time, those vasanas come. We cannot say where. I mean, we've been taking. I mean, ever since we rose as ego, we've been having Vishaya vasanas. So the vasanas we have now are the vasanas that we've cultivated in the past. So in that sense, our will is limited by our vasanas to some extent. However, vasanas are only inclinations. We are never bound to act on our inclinations. I may feel strongly inclined to say something very, you may have done something nasty to me in the past, and I may have great resentment towards you, so I may have a strong inclination to say something hurtful to you. But I'm not forced to act on that inclination. I can refrain from acting on that inclination. So vasanas are only inclinations. We're never bound by our vasanas. So where the real freedom lies is the freedom. We are always free to be swayed or not swayed by any particular vasana. So what, as Bhagavan said, the vasanas rise in countless numbers like ocean waves. Throughout the waking and dream state, in fact, the whole waking and dream state is nothing but a play of our vasanas. Because it's vasanas that rise as likes, dislikes, and desires, attachments, and so on, and which in turn give rise to thoughts, which in turn gives rise to this whole world. So it's all nothing but, all Vishayas, that's all objects or phenomena, are nothing but a projection of our Vishaya vasanas. But we are free to be swayed by our vasanas or not swayed by them. That's where the real freedom of will lies. So yes, well, yeah, I mean, that's what the point. One of the points you were getting at. In that sense, yes, we have freedom because vasanas are only inclinations. We are not bound by our inclinations. We may be strongly inclined to follow our inclination. That's why they're called inclinations. I mean, we're all strongly inclined to follow our inclinations because of what the nasty thing that you did to me in the past. I may be strongly inclined to say something very hurtful to you, but I'm not bound to say something very hurtful to you. It's much better for my mental health if I forgive all the wrongs you've done in the past and refrain from doing it. So the real freedom lies in whether we allow ourselves to be swayed by our vasanas or not. And just in case anyone misunderstands, you haven't done anything nasty to me in the past, and I don't have any, but I'm just using that as an example. We have all sorts of inclinations, but we're not bound to act on our inclinations.
So, Michael, ultimately, would it be fair to say that the best and the highest use of the free will in our evolution is to go back and attend to the self?
Absolutely.
At every time.
Absolutely.
Every time, no matter what is happening outside.
Absolutely. But some people, in some places it's being misrecorded, but Bhagavan said that is the only freedom you have. It's not the only freedom we have. For example, I gave the example earlier of someone who has who's a habitual smoker. They have a strong inclination to smoke, but they also have an inclination to give up smoking. They have a freedom. They're not bound to continue smoking. They have a freedom to refrain from being swayed by that inclination to smoke. So we are using our freedom of will moment to moment to moment, because so many, as Bhagavan said, the vasanas are rising in countless numbers like ocean waves, and we are constantly deciding to be swayed by some vasanas and not by other vasanas. But so so long as we're attending to external things, it's better to be swayed by what are called subhavasanas. That's the more agreeable vasanas. So the inclination to be kind, to be generous, to be forgiving, to be understanding. And the asubhavasanas, all the disagreeable vasanas, the vasanas to be mean and selfish and everything. So so long as we're facing outwards, it's better to be swayed by subhavasanas than asubhavasanas. But both subhavasanas and asubhavasanas all are vishaya vasanas. So the best vasana is all, the only vasana that in the final analysis is truly subha is satvasana. But that's the only vasana that will take us back to our source. So in self-investigation, when we hold on to self-attentiveness, we are allowing ourselves to be swayed by our satvasana and thereby refraining from being swayed by any vishaya vasanas.
Michael, it's so beautiful. Can I ask the last question? Is there a way other than practice to bolster and buttress and empower this sadvasana that makes you go in? Prayer to Bhagavan or prayer to what do you recommend?
Prayer can certainly help, because particularly people talk about whether prayer is effective. If we're praying for external things, it may sometimes seem that our prayers are answered, but actually whatever happens is according to destiny. So sometimes we may be given such a destiny that it seems to us that our prayers are being answered. But praying for anything concerning what we are to experience is futile because it's already destined. So, but if we are praying for the love to turn within, if we're praying for the if we're praying for that love to turn within in whatever way that may be, or we're praying to be free from all our impurities or whatever it is, by praying we are attuning our will with Bhagavan's will, because Bhagavan wants nothing other than for us to turn within and merge back into our source. So if we pray to him for the love to do so, we are attuning our will with his will. And by praying thus, because we're attuning our will, it helps us to turn within. So prayer is certainly an effective means. Another effective means is to be constantly dwelling on Bhagavan's teachings. When we're not actually attending to ourselves, constantly thinking about his teachings, because that, if we're constantly thinking about his teaching, that'll be pulling our attention back to ourselves again and again, because his teachings are all about this practice of self-attentiveness. They're all pointing us, giving us, motivating us to turn our attention within. So that can help. So there are aids. And of course, in Ayurveda, there's a saying, but there's a term called patyam. Patyam means the things you need to avoid when you're taking a treatment. So there's a saying in Ayurveda, without patyam, no medicine is effective. And with patyam, no medicine is necessary. So like that, it's not only necessary to focus on turning our attention within, we also need to refrain from indulging in the things that are going to pull our attention outwards. So that is what is called, I think the term is titiksha. I'm not sure if that's the term, right? But anyway, there are various terms. So withdrawing the mind from going outwards. So not allowing the mind to be carried away. If we're spending all our day watching violent movies or something, that's not exactly going to help us in the practice of self-attentiveness. Or if we're always playing video games or reading the news or engaging in gossip or whatever, these are all activities that pull the mind outwards. So refraining from those sort of activities can also help. That's a sort of a negative out. So in other words, abstention, abstaining from things that will incline our mind to go outwards more and more.
That's beautiful advice. Very grateful, Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
And also using our power of discrimination, constantly, that is not allowing ourselves to get carried away by things. Using our power of discrimination can help a lot in that respect.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
So
Awesome.
if we undertake this practice, this is a full-time job. Even whatever
Yes.
else we may be engaged in, this should be the underlying. Whatever else we should are engaging in, we should be trying to hold on to that self-attentiveness. And we may be failing, but we should be trying to, if not always succeeding, we should at least be dwelling on such thoughts that will encourage us to turn our attention back to ourselves.
It should be all-consuming.
All consuming, absolutely.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for all of your follow-up questions, Sharon, Jacques, and David. And thank you so much, Deepthi, for the initial question. And thank you for your clarification, Michael. Okay, we move onward for Ronnie's question. Maharishi says, Maharishi says there is only one. Yet, as disciples of Maharishi, if we look at him as separate, are we not perpetuating duality?
Yeah, we need to understand that is, when we rise as ego, duality comes into being. And duality is never real, but duality seems to exist so long as we rise as ego. Because when we rise as ego, we limit ourselves. And so everything that is, I take myself to be this body. So everything other than this body is something other than myself. So we have the fundamental duality of subject and object. So once we rise as ego, duality is, the appearance of duality is inevitable. So if we want to experience oneness, we should attend to nothing other than ourselves. Because if we attend to anything other than ourselves, we've got two things: the one who's attending and the thing who's attended to. So if we want, the only true Advaita Abhyasa, the only true practice of Advaita, non-duality, is self-attentiveness. Because any other practice involves in attending to something other than ourselves. So if we really want to experience non-duality, Advaita, we need to hold on to self-attentiveness. What Bhagavan actually is our own self. He's what we actually are. He's our own being. But he has appeared outwardly in human name and form in order to tell us the term within. So Bhagavan is not the body. He's not the form in which he appeared. But what is shining through that form, that is Bhagavan. That is our own self is shining through that form, telling us to turn within. So naturally we feel love for Bhagavan. And so long as we look outward, yes, of course there's duality. I am different, but I mean, there's a difference. It's inevitable there. That's why in verse, today there was, well, actually it was pre-recorded. Today is Bhagavan's Jayanti. So there's a global satsang, but they asked everyone to pre-record. So I was asked various questions and asked to record my answers, which I did about a month ago, and it was broadcast earlier today. One of the questions I was asked was about verse 39 of Uludunaptu Anubandham. In that verse, Bhagavan says, well, it's a verse that Bhagavan translated. It's an old verse, but it's fully in tune with Bhagavan's teachings, of course. He says, always experience Advaita in the heart. Always experience that non-duality in the heart. That is our aim. How to experience that non-duality in our heart? By attending to nothing other than ourselves. That is not in the verse, that I'm just explaining that. So he says, always experience Advaita in the heart. Never even once try to put Advaita in practice. That should be obvious to us, because if we say put it not into practice, into action. Sorry, he said, do not put it into action. Action is possible only in the state of duality. So trying to put Advaita into action shows a complete misunderstanding of Advaita. Then he says, the next sentence is, the meaning of the next sentence is not very obvious unless you have a bit of background information. He says, Advaita is appropriate in all the three worlds. What he means by that, the three worlds means the worlds of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. In other words, Brahma Loka, Vaikuntha, and Kailasha. So they're the worlds represent the gods who are in those worlds. Those gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, they have respective responsibilities. Creation is the responsibility of Brahma. Sustenance is the responsibility of Vishnu. And dissolution is the responsibility of Shiva. These are three of what are called the Panchakritiyas, the 5 divine functions. The other two are, one is Tirodhana, or Tirobhava, it's sometimes called, which means veiling. So why is veiling a divine function? The veiling referred to is the veiling of ignorance. Without self-ignorance, no creation, sustenance, or dissolution could take place. That the whole appearance of this world depends upon our ignorance. So in order, the underlying basis of creation, sustenance, and dissolution is our self-ignorance. So long as we want to experience this world, we are kept in that state of self-ignorance. So that is also a divine function. That's the 4th one. The 5th divine function is anugraha. Anugraha means grace. Grace is that power that removes that veil of ignorance. In other words, it's the power that draws our mind back within to see what we actually are. That power is the prerogative of Guru. Guru, in the 12th paragraph of Nana, Bhagavan says, Kadavalum Guruvum Unmail Verala. That means God and Guru are in truth not other. But God has these 5 functions, and the 5th function is the prerogative of Guru. It's God in the form of Guru, whose function is to bestow that grace that draws our mind back within and thereby removes the veil of self-ignorance, under which all this creation, sustenance, and dissolution take place. So we can claim to be Brahma, because every night when we dream, we create a world. We can claim to be Vishnu because we sustain that world. We can claim to be Shiva because we dissolve that world when we wake up. And if, as Bhagavan says, this waking state is a dream, we ourselves are the creator, the sustainer, and the dissolver of this dream. So, I mean, obviously we shouldn't do it, but Bhagavan said, okay, it's not inappropriate to go to to any of these gods and say you and I are one, because Brahma, just like you, I also create the world. Just like Vishnu, we are sustaining, and just like Shiva, we dissolve it. But the one function we can never claim a prerogative over is the function of grace. That is the ultimate function, the function that will dissolve ego. So as ego, we can never claim we can never lay claim over that grace. Though grace is actually our own reality. It's our own being. But when we rise as ego, we seemingly separate ourselves from our own being. So we cannot claim a prerogative over grace. So we should never claim equality with the Guru. That is, as Bhagavan says in the beginning of that verse, we should always experience that non-duality in our heart. So in our heart, we should experience Bhagavan as ourself. But outwardly, before Guru, we should always bow down. We should always prostrate. We should always abase ourselves before Guru. That means the external form of Guru. And of course, if there's the external form, duality is already there.
Thank you, Michael.
So I don't know if Ran is here. Is that a clear answer to your question?
I didn't see Ronnie.
Oh, maybe she's not here today. I think she had sent this question, but maybe she wasn't able to come. Anyway, I hope this is a satisfactory answer for her.
She can let us know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, moving on to Matt.
Hey, can I ask a quick follow-up question to Michael, please?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, sorry about that. You mentioned the 5 powers: the Prakriti,
Yes.
the creation, the maintenance, the dissolution, and the veiling, and Tirobhavana, and the grace.
Yeah.
So there is another power that has been described in Vedanta, which is called Vikshepa Shakti. There's power of projection, creating distractions, and also 2 or 3 other things. One is the feeling of impossibility, that I can never attain the self, and Viparita Bhavana, firm feeling that we are the body, mind, intellect. So these aberrant feelings, are they all coming from the power of Tirobhavana?
That is they're all coming from Tirobhavana, but these 5, these Panchakritiyas, these are the divine functions. Vikshepa is a function of Maya. Maya has it consists of 2 powers: the power of Varana, which is veiling, which we can say is more or less the same as this Tirubhava, and Vikshepa, which is for projection. That is experiencing ourselves as I am this body. That is the veiling. That's our Varana. And as soon as we experience ourselves as I am this body, we see a multitude of other forms. That is the Vikshepa. So the projection of all this multiplicity arises out of this this mistaken identity, I am this body. As Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Ulladu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. That is, we see other forms only when we identify ourselves as a form. And then in the next sentence he says, if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So it's only when we rise as ego and thereby identify ourselves as a body that we bring all other forms into being, both the forms of the world and all the forms of God.
So, Michael, is Maya separate power of Bhagavan, or is that it is not one of the 5 powers?
Maya, that is, there is only one divine power. That one divine power, the nature, that is the reality of that power is grace. So grace is the power that draws our mind within. But so long as we still have a strong liking to go outwards, we're constantly resisting that power of grace, which is pulling us within, and we succumb to the power of Maya. But the power of Maya is nothing other than the same power of grace being misused by us. That is, Maya is not an external power. Bhagavan made it clear, Maya is nothing but the mind or ego. That is it is as ego, but we mistake ourselves to be this body and thereby veil our true nature. That is, the reason why we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are is because we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, which is not what we actually are. So that is the veiling. And as soon as we veil ourselves, we project all this multiplicity. So the Maya is we can say, is our misuse of the power of grace. But and grace is nothing but God himself. God and his power are not two different things. When we, and God, and we are nothing other than God. God is our own reality. But when we rise as ego, we misuse that power, which is ultimately our own power. We misuse it in the form of Maya. So Maya is nothing but grace being misused.
And the best way to tap
Misuse
into
of
the Maya,
grace is Maya.
and the best way to tap into the grace is to do self-attention.
Yes, that is, because when we attend to ourselves, we are yielding ourselves to grace, because grace is that power that pulls our attention back within. So when we try to turn our attention back within, we are cooperating with grace. We are yielding ourselves to grace.
Thank you, Michael. Awesome.
There is only one, as Rani begins her question, Maharishi says there's only one. There is only one. And what that one is, Bhagavan is very explicit in the seventh paragraph of Nana. He begins by saying, Yatatamai uladu atmasarupam andre. Yatatamai uladu means what actually exists. Atmasarupam andre means it is only Atmaswarupa. Atma means ourself. Swarupa means, literally means our own form. It often Atmaswarupa is often translated as the real nature of ourself, but it's the real nature in the sense that it is what we actually are. That's why it's called Swarupa. Swarupa means it's our own form. It's not, of course, we're not a form, but it's that is, Swarupa is formless. It's a formless. It's called form metaphorically, but it's what we actually are. So what we actually are, that alone is what actually exists. So there's nothing other than that. So that is God, that is Guru, that is grace, that is Maya. Well, that is misused as Maya. And Maya is not what it actually is.
Right. And that's Ananda, Satchitananda, everything.
Yes, everything, yeah.
Okay. Very beautiful. Thank you, Michael.
And Bruce has his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it yesterday, but it seems like I just keep hearing this attention to grace, and this I hear the ego trying to turn the grace and manipulate it and trying to control the grace, to its own advantage. And I just, that's what I keep hearing in the discussion.
If we don't yield ourselves to the power of grace, but our very failure to yield ourselves to it,
There you go. Yielding to it.
Is misusing it.
Right.
So it's we who misuse grace in the form of Maya.
Yeah, I mean, it's like again, we talked about it yesterday, but it's very easy to be deluded by ego because grace is perpetually flowing. So, and if it's flowing in sentience, we're gonna perceive that insentience as actively living, as reality, and that is the Maya that you're talking about.
Yes. Sorry, there was something. I was about to say, and it slipped my mind. Something you said, and I was about to say something. I mean, it's gone from my mind.
Okay.
That is, we are, our very rising as ego is a misuse of that. That is, the power is one. That let's call it that power, grace. Our very rising as ego is a misuse of grace, and that misuse of grace is what we call Maya. So Maya, the origin of Maya is, Maya is nothing but ego. So rising as ego is the rising of Maya. So there's, in day by day, there are a couple of places where it is said, the term Devaraj Mudli has used in English is the self, but there's no equivalent term, exact equivalent term of the self in Tamil. I suspect the term would have been Swarupa. So I'll replace the word the self in the English recording with the word that was probably used in the original, which is Swarupa. Someone asked Bhagavan, in one, there are two places where there's a similar thing Bhagavan says, but in one of the contexts, someone asked Bhagavan, what is the difference between Swarupa and mind? Bhagavan said there is no difference. The same mind, when turned outwards, becomes all of this. When that same mind is turned within, it remains a Swarupa. So there's only that one power of knowing, that Chit Shakti. If we misuse it by turning it outwards, away from ourselves, it is Maya. The same Chit Shakti, the same power of awareness, when we use it wisely to focus only on ourselves, we thereby subside back into our being and remain as we actually are. That is grace.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, Bruce. And Lorraine, now is this Lorraine, or is this David as Lorraine?
It's Lorraine.
Okie doke.
Michael, would Maya be termed the fallen angel in Christianity? And if so, why is it not duality, the fallen angel and the angel? It's not duality, I can see that, but it's very subtle that it's not a duality.
It is duality. That is, the fallen angel is nothing but ego. The rising of ego is the falling of the angel. We are ever with God. We are ever as God. But when we rise as ego, we fall from our divine nature. So there's a concept in Christianity, I think it originated from, what was it, St. Augustine, I think. It's a concept of original sin. When Bhagavan was asked about original sin, he said, original sin is nothing but ego. That is, in other words, the sinner is the original sin. All sin begins from the sinner. The sinner is ego. So ego is the fallen angel. Maya is well, Maya is synonymous with the rising of ego. The rising and standing of ego is Maya. But Maya means Yama. Ya is a feminine form of what? So she who is Ya, Ma is a strong negative. So she who is not. But power is always conceptualized as feminine, whether divine power in the form of Shakti, which is the power of Shiva, and of course Shiva and his power are one and the same. But Maya is also considered, it's a Shakti, so it's a power. it's considered, I mean, it's considered as feminine. So it's called, Maya means she who is not. So Maya, the very name Maya means Maya doesn't exist. But though it doesn't exist, it seems to exist. But in whose view does it seem to exist? Only in the view of ego, which is itself Maya. So ego exists only in its own view. So our rising as ego is the falling of the fallen angel, the Satan or whatever. There's no evil other than ego. Ego is the root of all evil.
Right, thank you.
But
So
Bhagavan, sorry, were you going to say something else?
it's not a duality because the ego doesn't exist. Maya doesn't actually exist because
It is duality, because as soon as we rise as ego, we bring into appearance the appearance of duality. Duality is never real, but it seems to exist. Now Lorraine and Michael are having a conversation. There are two there. There's Lorraine and there's Michael. There's duality. So long as we rise as ego, we experience the appearance of duality. But even when duality seems to be, it is never actually real.
Oh, that clarifies that. Thank you ever so much.
Yeah. So as soon as we rise as ego, we bring into being all the pairs of opposites, the good and evil, the existence and non-existence, the awareness and non-awareness, knowledge and ignorance, happiness and unhappiness. All these pairs of opposites come into being as soon as we rise as ego. As Bhagavan points out in verse 9 of Uludunapadu. But dyads and triads, their dyads means these pairs of opposites. For triads means the triputi, that is the knower, the known, and the means of knowing. That is in any knowledge of anything other than ourselves, there are three factors. There's the knower, namely ourself as ego. There's whatever it is we know, and there's a means of knowing it. Now I am seeing this a computer screen in front of me. So I am the subject, the computer screen is the object, and the means by which I know this object in front of me is seeing. So seeing becomes the means of, so there's the seer, the seeing, and the seen. So that is called triputi. Bhagavan says these dyads and triads exist always holding on to one. He doesn't specify there what that one is, but he very clearly explained what he means by the one there is ego. Because ego is the subject. There cannot be anything known without a means of knowing it. And there cannot be either anything known or any means of knowing it without a knower. So ego is the root of the triad. And pairs of opposites, the life and death, happiness and unhappiness, knowledge and ignorance, all these pairs of opposites, bondage and liberation, they exist in whose view? Only in the view of ego. So all these depend upon ego. And then he says, if one looks within the mind to see what that one is, in other words, if we look within to see what is this ego, they will drop off. Why will they drop off? Because when we turn our attention back towards ourselves to see what we actually are, we as ego subside. And when we subside, the dyads and triads cease to exist along with us. So
Wow,
the very rising of ego is the birth of the appearance of duality. I'm not saying duality is real. Duality is never real. Even when it seems to be real, it's not real. But it's all just an appearance.
thank you. That's really helps.
Yeah.
And Jacques has his hand up again.
Yes, Michael, before Lorraine's question, you were talking about the misuse of anugraha or grace. And I think you were referring to Maharishi's gospel, and by saying that he talked about how even ego is self. And there's a classical, in classical Vedanta, they often bring up this example of even Sadhu Om brings it up in his book, The Path of Self-Enquiry. The example of, for example, sexual gratification through sexual activity, how the pleasure, oh, it could be any seeking for pleasure, but I mean, it's the one that's often brought up, how the pleasure we get is actually originates, or to put it differently, I know you know where I'm going. It's that you get pleasure, but once you've gotten the pleasure and it's satiated, for a split second, it brings you to the self, and then you're dissatisfied again, and then you want to go back out for more. I wonder if you could expound on that, because it's something that has always eluded me in that.
Yeah. I mean, this applies to any desire, but as you say, sexual desires are very, for most of us, sexual desire is a very strong desire. If we think about it, the desire for that sexual gratification is actually much stronger than any trivial pleasure we get from it. So, and what the trivial pleasure we get from it is because of that is, any desire is an agitation in the mind. So when a desire is gratified, that agitation in the mind temporarily subsides. And because of that subsidence of that agitation, the underlying happiness that is our real nature, at least an iota of it shines through. Bhagavan, in some place, I think in Guru Vachaka Kovai, compares it to the moonshine that is filtered through the leaves of a forest. If you're walking in a dense forest at night, a little bit of the moonlight will filter through. So the pleasure we gain from these from the gratification of any type of desire is just like the little pieces of moonlight that are filtered through the dense foliage of a forest. That is, it's nothing like the fullness of happiness that is our real nature, but it's just a little samples of that happiness, little iotas of that happiness we experience when any desire is gratified. But the actual pleasure lies in the relief from that. Another example we can see very clearly. If you're desperate to go to the toilet, if you're desperate to answer the calls of nature, when we go to a toilet, sometimes we feel such a relief. We can palpably feel, but that's not. Where is that pleasure coming from? It's nothing but the relief from the urgent pressure of what we were experiencing to go to the toilet. So we can, if we observe these things in our day-to-day life, this is so with any type of desire we may have, whether minor, trivial desire or a very strong desire. That is, the stronger the desire, the greater the relief when that desire is gratified.
So the Maya of pleasure actually then is the anticipation, really.
Yes. I mean, think of sexual gratification. Really, if we really think about it dispassionately, what pleasure is there in there? It's just a physical sensation.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because of the strong desire we have in that, and that strong desire is implanted in us, so to speak, because we identify a mammal body as I, and mammals reproduce by sexual activity. So it's sort of, it's hardwired into us, that desire. But really, it's such a trivial thing, but it is a powerful Maya. It has such a power to pull the mind outwards, and that's why there's so many stories in the Puranas about great sages who have who either succumbed to that Maya, or they I think even Buddha, when he was approaching enlightenment, Mara, I think is what is a
Yes.
sort of Buddhist equivalent of Maya. Maya came in the form of some beautiful damsels or something like that. So it's such a strong Maya, but really the desire is so strong, the pleasure derived from it is so trivial. But though we
Thank you,
know
Michael.
it's trivial, knowing that it's trivial, it doesn't help to lessen the strength of that desire.
Indeed. Thank you, Michael.
Bhagavan says a couple of nice things in Guru Vachakakavai about desire. He says, no desire can ever be quenched by gratifying it. Gratifying desires, satisfying desires is just like pouring petrol on a fire. The more you gratify the desire, the more it blazes forth. That's one thing, one analogy he uses. And another place he says, there is no bottomless pit as bottomless as the pit of desire. Because however much we try to fill that pit by trying to satisfy all our desires, they're never satisfied. They never can be satisfied. Because what we are all actually seeking is the infinite happiness that is our real nature. And we can't get that so long as we remain finite, we can never experience that infinite happiness, but we actually are. So it's only by knowing ourselves as we actually are that we can experience that infinite happiness. So nothing less than that infinite happiness will ever satisfy us. We may be momentarily satisfied when we get what we want, but it's only momentary, so fleeting. And
Until
then
the next second.
the next second, then we want something else, or we want the same thing again, but more.
Thank you.
Michael, can I ask you for clarification?
I think the hands show in order. So I think Matt was the first one.
Thank you. Yeah, I submitted a question through TED. This is my first time here, so
Yes,
thank you. And
okay.
it looked like you were about to get to the question, and then the hand started going up, so I figured I better raise my hand.
Yeah.
Michael, I had the great opportunity to travel to India and sit in Ramana Maharshi's cave 10 or 15 years ago, and my question is a relatively simple one. And when I sat in that cave, I just had an incredible spinning of thoughts that was really just quite astonishing. And so I was just curious to know your insight as to what was going on with me at that point. It
Right.
was just this, yeah, thank you. You know the question.
Yeah, well, actually, yours is the next question on the list. It's exactly the same question. So, you've asked it yourself. That's good. That is, we can never say how these things are going to work. Sometimes when we're in the presence of grace, grace can have the effect of churning up the dirt that is inside. Once when Bhagavan was talking about meditation, and someone was saying, "Oh, when I try and meditate, so many thoughts arise to the surface of the mind." And then Bhagavan said, "Yes, they have to arise, because if they don't arise, you can't clear them out." That is what is meant by that is what gives rise to the thoughts are the vasanas. And the vasanas are nothing but inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. So I don't know what your thoughts were about, but whatever the thoughts were about, it was the vasanas towards those things were churned up to the surface. When vasanas rise to the surface, we are faced with the choice. Either we follow those thoughts, we allow ourselves to be carried away by those inclinations, or we refrain from being carried away by them. Either by following some other inclination, outward inclination, or better still, by following the inclination to turn within. So the arising of thoughts is not necessarily a bad thing. What is a bad thing is allowing ourselves to be carried away by those thoughts. That's why Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of Nana, etane eningal erinomena. That means however many thoughts arise, so what? So Bhagavan isn't concerned about the thoughts. He doesn't ask us to be concerned about the thoughts. What we need to avoid is being carried away by the thoughts. So let the thoughts rise, but let us turn our attention back to ourselves, the one to whom they arise. That's why Bhagavan gave us this very nice clue. Whatever may appear, whatever we may experience, to whom is it experienced? Who is the experiencer of this? So the thoughts are not a problem. Our liking to attend to the thoughts, to follow the thoughts, that is the problem. So perhaps in that presence, because of the power of Arunachala, those vasanas within you were churned up to the surface. But were you carried away by those thoughts or not? That is the thing. Well, often we do fail. We often get carried away by thoughts. But every time a thought rises, it's an opportunity for us to avoid being carried away by it, an opportunity to turn our attention back to ourselves, the one to whom the thoughts appear.
Thank you. I think part of the issue was my expectation that of sitting in that cave, I was going to be saturated with bliss. I was going to have, and you know, you understand what I'm saying. I'll finish there because I want Margot to ask for a question. Thank you for.
It reminded me slightly. Sadhu Om, he told me, but once when he was in Bhagavan's presence, people say in Bhagavan's presence everything is calm and peaceful. So he thought to himself, is it possible to have bad thoughts in Bhagavan's presence? I have no idea what sort of bad thoughts he could think of. But anyway, he decided to think of some bad thoughts to see if it's possible in Bhagavan's presence. And he did. He thought of something bad, and Bhagavan simply looked at him. And as soon as Bhagavan looked at him, he very clearly understood. Bhagavan knew exactly what was happening.
Thanks, Matt. And now maybe we could further explore your question, but Marco did have her hand up, and I imagine it was pertaining to the previous question.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
My question, I'm not exactly sure if it's relevant to what you've been talking about, but it's been something that I've been
I've been thinking relevant to Bhagavan's teachings.
It is. So I guess the thing that as I think more deeply about everything in terms of his teachings, the thing that I can't wrap my head around is this. If the one reality is non-dual, is that being consciousness bliss, or that's the nature of it. And this experience that I'm having as the single dreamer that I am is just an appearance, is just ego that has risen. Then why do I need to worry about any of this? Why do I need to concern myself with self-attentiveness at all? If in truth, the reality is unchanging and I am part of that. I am that reality, right? We all are. There is no separation. That's the illusion. So this practice of self-attentiveness then I mean, I understand it, but I don't, because I don't understand how there is anything other than that one truth.
Why should you attend to yourself? If you're perfectly happy with your present state of illusion, go on enjoying it. No one asked you to. No one asked you not to enjoy it. The only problem is it's not actually so enjoyable. Or even if it does sometimes seem to be a little bit enjoyable, for every pleasure there's a equal and opposite pain. So if you're content as you are, Bhagavan never gave any teachings of his own accord. But in Bhagavan's view, everything is perfect.
Yeah.
So Bhagavan gave teachings only when people asked him. So if you tell
So it's a
Bhagavan,
relief
if you ask
suffering.
Bhagavan, I'm happy with my present situation, why should I attend to myself? He'll say, yes, why should you attend to yourself? But if you come back after some time and say, oh, Bhagavan, my present state is a bit miserable, I'm experiencing misery, then he'll say, then find out who is experiencing the misery.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
There's no compulsion in Bhagavan's path at all. So we can continue allowing our mind to go outwards and dwell on all the politics and all the horrors in the world, or the movies on television, or we can do whatever we want. We're completely free to do whatever we want. But if we find that we are not satisfied with these things, if we find there's a deep underlying dissatisfaction, and if we find that life throws all sorts of suffering at us in all sorts of forms, and even if at the moment we're not suffering so much, suffering can come at any time. So long as we're mortal, so long as we identify a body as I, it can cause, suffering can come in so many different forms. So this is not entirely a satisfactory situation we find ourselves in. Because if we recognize how unsatisfactory this state is, then we want a solution for this unsatisfactory nature of things. Then only are we advised to attend to ourselves. So the motivation has to come from us. Bhagavan will never force us. If you want to continue in your present state, that's fine.
Well, I guess it's more about if this isn't even real, then that's the part that's so confusing to me. What is this experience?
It is true. None of it is real, but it seems pretty real, doesn't it?
Yeah. So where?
Supposing you have a severe headache.
Where am I then?
Supposing you have a severe headache. It's not real, but it seems pretty real when you have it, doesn't it?
It does,
that is, just because it's all unreal doesn't mean that it doesn't seem to be real. And so long as it seems to be real, the suffering we undergo seems very, very real when we're suffering. So
sure, it's just like in a dream. Yeah, the suffering is very real. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Right. But the nice thing about Bhagavan's path, there's no compulsion. We're perfectly free to do whatever we want. But if we're wise, we will follow what Bhagavan advised us to do, because that's the only way out of the mess we've got ourselves into.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, Sri Ram, we only have a short while now, so
I'll ask a quick question. Michael, this is about obtaining pleasure. You talked about like any pleasure, sexual pleasure, otherwise. Isn't it true that we, the Triputi, the ego, creates its own object and then envelops the object? It's called Phalavyapti and Vastuvyapti, and then it hunkers after them. So we are creating our own object, the Triputi. We are creating the experience, the subject, object, and the experiencing, and then we are hunkering after that.
Yeah.
Is that so?
In a dream, we may see so many things and have desire for those things. Those things we desire in dream are nothing other than ourselves. I mean, it's our own creation. It's our own mental fabrication. Likewise, this waking state, this whole world is nothing but, as Bhagavan says, if ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not. Ego itself is everything. That's what he says in verse 26 of Uludu Napadu. So none of these things have any existence independent of ourselves. So it's all our own creation. So we can say it's our reflection. Sadhu Om once said to me, we are like monkeys in front of a mirror. We come in front of a mirror and we see a monkey there. At first we think, oh, this is another monkey. I can play with this monkey. Then we go towards it and try to touch it, and it tries to touch us. Then we find the monkey is, everything we do, the monkey is copying us. Then we think we start to get angry with it, and all this is how we behave towards this world is just like that. It's all nothing but our own projection or reflection. We are seeing ourselves as all this world. That is why we need to know ourselves as we actually are. When we know ourselves as we actually are, we cease to know ourselves as all this multiplicity. We know ourselves as the one infinite, eternal Satchidananda.
That's a magic bullet for all troubles.
Yes.
Beautiful.
And one other person had their hand up.
Raghu, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, hi, Michael. So, I mean, that which rises in the body is the I thought, irrespective of whether Raghu is talking to you, Raghu is dreaming, or Raghu is in the dreamless sleep, or Raghu is dead. Irrespective of anything, the self that is unchanged, unmoved, it is still there as it is.
Yes.
Just that the I thought rises and it multiplies everything, and it looks for every object, and it just grabs on it. The first question, when they talked about the spiritual bypass, I mean, in many of the other sites, they say that you get progressed from a human being to a deva, to an angel, I mean, they think in that way.
Yeah.
And that's the reason when we talk about the abidance as we are, I mean, the natural love to abide is not coming up, because they wanted to explore more and more, and they think it in that way. The real abidance is, irrespective of whether Raghu is dead right now, the self remains as stillness as it is.
Yeah.
The one which is talking right now is just the ego.
Yeah.
And that is just a chit jada granthi of this body. Self has never entangled with anything.
Yes.
It's just the I thought itself.
Yes.
That's
I thought means ego. And that is, but all of this, there's no such thing as Raghu or a world independent of ego. It's only when we rise as ego that we experience ourselves as I am Raghu, I am Michael, I am Mickey, I'm anyone. It's all this is an expansion of ego. That's why Bhagavan says, Ahande Yavamam. Ego itself is everything. That is, as ego, we see ourselves as all of this multiplicity.
When Bruce was actually saying a word which you actually left from your mind, he was actually saying that perceiving the reality, when the mind comes into the world, it perceives the reality as an active mechanism, like, actively participating, looking in the objects and everything. It is none other than the reality. The same way, when the people ask the question, they say, like, why should I even do the self-enquiry when I'm actually happy in this world and I'm experiencing an active reality. Why do I have to abide and be in that, the infinite happiness? But then it all comes under...
When we are very much deluded, we take this, well, it's not reality, this appearance. We take this appearance to be very real and very pleasurable, and we think we can get more and more pleasure from it. So though I'm not perfectly happy now, if I can get some more money, if I can get some more fame, if I can be more learned, if I can have a new life in the next life, if I'm in Devaloka or Brahmaloka or something, then I'll be happier. This is all what is called pravritti marga, the path of going outwards. Whereas Bhagavan's path, The path of Advaita is Nivritti Marga, the path of withdrawing back within. So we have a choice. We are perfectly, if we want to go outwards, if we want to try and experience Brahmaloka or heaven or any of these things, we can try. But for every pleasure, there's an equal and opposite pain. So it's a risky thing to do. But if we want to try, we're at full liberty to do so.
No, people are aware of the death and they're aware of the old age. They know the disease that is going to incur in this body. It's a
death
host
is
of
not today.
everything
Death is
everybody knows
sometime
it.
in the future. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm not going to die now.
Yeah.
One thing Bhagavan said, the fact that we are all immortal is clearly seen in the fact that none of us really believe in our own death. We all know the body is going to die, but though we know it, we never really believe it, because what we actually are is immortal. But we superimpose that immortality on this body as if this body is going to live forever. That is, we all say, yes, I know I'm going to die one day, but we don't live as if we're going to die one day. We live as if we're going to live forever.
I mean, one last question, Michael. I know I slept very well last night, though it is not a memory, that is an experience. I mean, not an experience, but I do know that I slept well.
Yes.
Though it is a darkness or anything. That is the same I that is in Michael, that is with Sandra, that is with Mickey, everybody, isn't it, Michael? It's just that the Chit Jada Granthi comes into, I mean, the entanglement of false I that rises up this body. And then, even as you said, the person is like 90 years old and is about to get died, but still they do not feel that they are going to die. The body says so, but the ego is like, tomorrow you're going to die. I'm not going to die.
No.
That instance there.
Everyone else dies. I'm not going to die. Because we actually know, we actually recognize we are immortal. But because we identify ourselves with the body, we confuse our own immortality with, and we superimpose that upon the body. So even though at one level we know the body is going to die, we never really take our own death seriously.
Yes.
Bhagavan said, even in the midst of a battlefield, when a soldier see his comrades dying around him, he never feels that he's going to die. That he's afraid of all the bombs and things, but they never really, they're afraid of injury, but the death itself is never a reality, even in the midst of a battlefield.
They also say there are no atheists in the trenches.
Yes.